Okay, so the next speaker, I'm glad to invite Professor Jonathan Pryce. He is the Lessing Professor of Ancient History in Tel Aviv University. He's written extensively on ancient historiography in Greek and Latin, and ancient epigraphy focusing on Jewish inscription. Among his publications are the books Jerusalem Under Siege, The Collapse of the Jewish State, 66 to 70 CE, and Thucydides, An Internal Conflict, 5-volume of Corpus Inscriptionum, a multilingual corpus of inscription from Alexander to Muhammad, for which he has edited the Jewish inscriptions. So please, Professor Jonathan Pryce.
Can I get my,
I put it here, yeah. לא, זה פה, רק תשים תפתח לו את אחד.
There you go. Good. Okay, and where's the...
קדימה, אחורה ופוינטר.
Okay, pointers, is it?
כן,
Okay, good.
בדיוק.
Okay, good. לא, זה בלתי אפשרי.
עכשיו בסדר.
Okay, כן? לא. Okay. Well, thank you. This is not, זה לא בסדר. Thank you, first of all, זה בסדר? לא, זה... Okay, reverberation. In some kinds of music, this... Okay. בסדר, אני אקצר. Okay. Thank you to Mira and all the organizers of this conference. Thank you to you as well, who have been through 2 days of papers and now a fascinating, I'm sure, but probably tiring tour of Masada. I'm sure the last thing you want to do is hear about ancient inscriptions. But I will try to get the essential points across without wearying you too much. So thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you. If you're tired, maybe pretend that you're interested. My topic, my brief and even growing briefer topic today will not fit seamlessly in the talks you've heard so far on geology, biology, ecology, chemistry, and so forth. Rather, the topic of my talk is one area of my research, which is epigraphy, epigraphia, which means writing on. In other words, it's the study of writing on diverse materials. It's not a logia, like biology and geology, but there is method and logic involved. And also I'll be talking about materials just from my period. David mentioned that I teach in classics and history at Tel Aviv, so my period is really from Homer, from about 8th century BCE to Islam, the 7th century, although the things you'll see today are really from the first 7 centuries of the Common Era. However, given the general theme of this conference, life in extreme conditions, there maybe will be a contribution if you consider life in terms of literary culture, vibrant life of cultured individuals and communities, as can be seen in their written remains. So life in extreme conditions, not a lesson from nature, I think is the title, but a lesson from stone slabs, plastered walls, ceramic shards, mosaic floors, that sort of thing. Despite the extremely challenging conditions down here, in the period I study, the Greco-Roman period, many people lived around the Dead Sea and throughout the Judean desert. And this, as we know from the remains of their habitations, you just saw Masada, so there's fortresses, small towns and habitations, churches, a synagogue here and there, but also caves throughout the entire Judean desert. So we not only from their physical remains we know about life, but also we see signs of life in a fairly large collection of written materials in different languages left by the people here. So in my period, as it were, the people who lived here in an area now covered by the modern states of Israel and Jordan and parts of Syria and Lebanon were intensely multicultural and intensely multilingual and intensely what I would call hypergraphic. It is, in the ancient world, maybe the most intense center of meeting of culture, multiculturality, to use a jargony word, in the entire ancient world. And most of the peoples who lived here were literate, and most of them left written remains, which is what I study. Now, written materials fall into in ancient studies, in two general categories. One is the area of papyrology, which studies materials written on papyri and parchment, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, which David talked about. This is the Isaiah scroll. If you've ever been to the Israel Museum, those who've been to Israel for the first time, go to the Shrine of the Book. There's a room devoted to this. You'll feel like you're enwrapped by this scroll. And here's another scroll of the whoever lived there, Qumran, the War of the Sons of Light against the Darkness. It's a vision of the last war, the end of time. The Sons of Darkness, by the way, include Jews, not just the enemies of the Jews. And in addition to the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are also, this is less well known popularly, there's also dozens, maybe hundreds of documents that were found in other places in the Judean desert, written on papyri and parchment, such as these two ketubot, these two marriage contracts, the one in Aramaic and one in Greek. So that's papyrology. The second sort of sub-discipline of ancient history, which studies written materials, is epigraphy, which is what I do. These are various texts ranging from, here's another, well, I won't get into this because we don't have time, although it's really quite fascinating. Epigraphy, materials written, things written on other materials than papyri and parchment. There was a reason for this, which I don't have time to get into, why there's two separate disciplines. But these are just examples, not from all the Judean desert, but of the different kinds of materials that we find. This is a pillar at the end of a pier in Caesarea, which has Pontius Pilate's name. This is a bone box, an ossuary, with the name of a very famous Alexandrian Jew who contributes door to the temple. This is a stone pillar carrying a decree, imperial decree from one of the Seleucid kings. A marble epitaph found in a cave in Jaffa. This I'll get back to. A mosaic floor from En-Gedi. This is an ostracon, a ceramic shard with a receipt on it. This is a wall, a painted inscription on a wall in Beit Sharim. And there's other things as well. These are just to demonstrate the kinds of things we deal with. Now, this is what I've been dealing with for the past 12 or 15 years as part of my research. As David mentioned, I'm one of the editors or main scholars in this series of books called the corpus. What in classics we still give Latin titles to things. It just means the corpus, the collection of inscriptions from Judea, Palestina, from Alexander, the 4th century BCE, to Muhammad. These are the volumes that have come out so far. This is all the inscriptions found in Israel, modern-day Israel, dating from the 4th century BCE to the 7th or 8th century CE, in all languages. When we're finished, there will be about 13,000 texts in 10 languages in this corpus. These are the ones that come out so far, containing about 4,000 texts, dividing the country topographically. You can see this is put out by the academic publishers De Gruyter in Berlin. And their graphics department is absolutely brilliant in conveying in a sort of attractive way, I don't mean that, our purpose, but these are the volumes so far. And it is kind of innovative in the field of epigraphy because it's everything in all languages in one volume. That's why we need a team of people. As I said, there's 13,000 texts in 10 languages. You can imagine that the biggest concentration of text are in urban areas. But really, they're all over. Practically anywhere you put a spade in the ground in this country or explore a cave, you find written things, including the Judean desert and including the area around the Dead Sea. So there's a lot to talk about, too much. So I'll just give you 5 categories of inscriptions. And just imagine for each category I'm giving you, there's dozens, sometimes hundreds of examples just from this area, this inhospitable Dead Sea area. I'll start small and get bigger, and I've tried to choose inscriptions that give unique information. That is, inscriptions for historians again, are useful in three ways. Some just confirm information that we know, but it's nice to have the confirmation. If we know someone existed and we have his epitaph, he was buried here, nice to have that, but it doesn't add information. Other inscriptions supplement what we know. For example, we know there was a Roman governor, we know about him, we know where he governed, but then we find a dedication to him where he gives his entire CV. Well, that adds information to what we already knew about this particular Roman governor, or it could be anybody. It could be a priest or anybody, really. And then there are inscriptions that give us entirely new information that we don't know from any other source, and these are the most exciting kinds of inscriptions, usually. Unique information. So we'll start small. These are, again, I've chosen inscriptions from this area, from around the Dead Sea, just to illustrate the categories of text that we have. So these are cave inscriptions from places like northwest of Qumran. These are caves, plaster cisterns and caves. They were used as hiding places during the first revolt, the same revolt that Guy was talking to you about, the last episode at Masada. This was before that, and they were hiding from the Romans, and they wrote, while they were hiding in the caves, they wrote on the walls. The first one says, peace, peace, amen. Of course, context means everything. If you just found this on a wall, you think, oh, that's a nice sentiment. But if someone is hiding and worrying about his life and his future, when he writes shalom, shalom, that has a much different and even deeper layered meaning than sort of a generic shalom. This one is exciting. Yoezer has been uprooted, itakar. The guards have entered. Probably this means that Yoezer was hiding there. There are many people named Yoezer we know about in the first revolt. And someone, probably not Yoezer himself, someone who was in the cave, scrawls really fast as Yoezer is being carried away by the guards. This is one interpretation. It's been interpreted otherwise, but this is maybe a dramatic. See, you can see it's even. Whoops, sorry. It's even scrawled quickly. You can see the handwriting here. It was just saying Yoezer's taken, the guards have entered, and we find that 2,000 years later. And here's just someone who's practicing writing. Here's just the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet. The Kars is, of course, from a later period. A Byzantine monk also inhabited this cave. Or the alphabet had magic powers. So that also could be. The second category of inscriptions are what I call ostraca. This very excited guy probably mentioned this. Ben Yair, the leader of the revolt. Yadin, the first excavator of Masada, had a theory that this was part of the lots they drew during the suicide operation up there. These are just small things. A ring from somebody, this is a piece of bone. These are up in Masada and elsewhere. When they were constructing the columns, many pieces, they need to know what went on what, so they had what are called mason's marks. There's dozens of these from Masada. These are sort of, as I said, small things. The next category of inscriptions we find around the Dead Sea and elsewhere are personal things like amulets. This was rolled up in a scroll, and we've unrolled it. This is on silver found in a cave near the Dead Sea. A personal amulet that someone wrote and tried to use as a way to heal. It's full of magical language and symbols in Hebrew and Aramaic, but the important things are please save. He appeals to the magical powers, to the divine powers rather. Save Kuzma, son of Salminu, from affliction, bad fate, from plague. He obviously was sick, and this is one way of getting better, to write a silver amulet and use it in a certain way. Maybe even put it in the cave, so that only the powers below and above can see it. Be healed, Kuzma, from this day to eternity. Blessed be he who afflicts and heals us. So this is a typical amulet. Again, there are dozens of these found throughout the country, and magic had a much more central place in ancient culture and society than we learn in our introductory classes courses, because this is one of the sides of ancient culture that they don't like to emphasize. Okay, we're going to En-Gedi tonight to eat dinner. I don't know if you've already been to En-Gedi, the excavations there. There's a synagogue there from the 5th or 6th century. And this is another category of texts, I would say mosaic floors in synagogues and churches all over the country, but also here. And especially synagogues were sort of the center of communities. This synagogue was, first of all, obviously quite wealthy because it was able to pay for this mosaic floor. It's pretty large, as well as other inscriptions throughout the mosaic, including this one. And what's interesting here is we learn a lot about this community, its existence, some of its beliefs and habits. Also, notice that this is aniconic, that is, there are zodiacs in synagogues throughout the country, but here, instead of images, because they, I think, took the second commandment seriously, they have just the names of the zodiac signs. This is, we can't read Hebrew, these are the names of the zodiac signs and the seasons. Instead of having images, you just have words. So this is a totally literary text, I would say. And the most interesting part is the third register here, which says, anyone causing controversy between man and his friend, whoever speaks slander, lashon hara, before the Gentiles, this is amim, whoever steals the property of his friend, whoever reveals the secret of the town to the Gentiles. And then God, they don't mention God's name. God is always in a circumlocution. He whose eyes reigns through the whole earth, they don't say God. And who sees hidden things, set his face on his man, and extirpate him from the heavens. So it's a pretty severe penalty. Of course, a lot of the scholarship on this inscription has been, what's the secret? 3 minutes. Okay, what's the secret of that they're trying to hide? Well, we don't know because it was a secret. And they all died before someone wrote it down. But the various theories are that, first of all, it's just a standard preemptive thing against the Gentiles. Another is proposed by a very famous scholar of the 20th century named Shaul Lieberman, that they processed the balsam that they extracted from the Dead Sea, and the secret, their industrial secret, was supposed to be kept entirely secret, otherwise without impairing their source of wealth. Others think it was the hiding place of the Torah scroll of the community. Others say it was more messianic, like esoteric knowledge, and so forth. This second inscription from En-Gedi shows us something that they had a different kind of community ethic than in the surrounding Greco-Roman culture, because they say, remember for the good, the kir the top, all residents of the town who gave from their own property. Usually when you have dedications in Greek and Roman culture, it's a person bragging, boasting, as large letters as possible, as much as they. Here's just anonymous. This is very isolated Jewish kind of ethic that doesn't reflect the surrounding Greco-Roman culture. So it's another interesting thing we can learn from this inscription. I'm going kind of fast, so I hope you're getting something from this. And the same kind of inscription we find in churches all throughout the Judean desert. Here's a church which is northwest of here, northwest of Masada. This was built into a cave. It wasn't a freestanding structure, as most were not in the desert. This inscription, the Florence the mosaic inscription, is a quotation in Greek from the Psalms. Just again, epigraphers have to be aware of context. This same verse, messianic verse from Psalms, which could be quoted in a synagogue, would have an entirely different meaning in a synagogue if it were quoted in Greek or Hebrew than it does in a church. Also in this church, another part was used for burials of monks, and we find this very lovely inscription: Holy Fathers, intercede for the peace of this place in our souls. Now the last category I'll do in 1 minute, is not in our corpus. It's from a site, this is in Jordan here, but international boundaries were meaningless for ancient history. This is a cemetery, so epitaphs. I just chose this because, first of all, it's from here. It's from the Dead Sea. Second, because it is really fascinating. I'll try to convey in 45 seconds how fascinating it actually is. This is a burial ground from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th centuries, even a little bit later, which had Christian burials as well as Jewish burials. The Christian epitaphs were in Greek. This is a typical one. And what's interesting here are just that, first of all, the dating formula, the detail of the date, and then this formula, don't worry, Tharsi, cheer up, no one's immortal except for God, right? Which is a theological statement, which is in fact common. You see this in a lot of Jewish inscriptions as well, in Greek and Hebrew. Well, not Hebrew, Greek, cheer up, no one's immortal, God's immortal. Here's another Christian inscription. Also, what's interesting about this, and if it refers to our senses with this, when you come to a site, there are what I would call the local epigraphical cultures, right? Which is to say they do things in a certain way in a certain place. So if you came here, even not speaking Greek, and you wanted an epitaph, they have like a template, which they pour all information into, and you see this every single text. Hundreds of Christian ones and a few dozen Hebrew ones are in a template. So here's the Christian template, and here's the Jewish one. It's in Aramaic. And what's interesting here are more than two things. So I'll point out two interesting things. First of all, they also date in detail, but not by the Greek month and the provincial date, a year, but by the sabbatical cycle and years of the destruction of the temple. So 300, 400, 500 years after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, the Jews are still counting from there, which says a lot. I mean, I won't go into all of what it says. This says a lot about the mindset, the historical context, sort of the whole theology and cultural way of thinking. Okay, that's one thing about Zohar, the destruction of the temple, shalom, shalom. And the last thing that's interesting here is this is one example from there of the Jewish inscriptions where he says he comes from, here's Yossi, son of Ufi, died in Safar, Chimyarite. Now, anyone know where Safar, the land of the Chimyarites, is? It's in southern Taiman, Yemen, right? There was a Jewish kingdom in Yemen in the 5th century CE. And there was a Jewish king there, and a Jewish kingdom, and he wanted to be buried in the Holy Land. So he came from Yemen to be buried. He actually came during his life. Many people waited till they died. Their bones were carried up to Eretz Israel, as he says in here, Eretz Israel, and he was buried here. Also, way north of here, in a much more hospitable place in the Galilee, in Beit Sharim, we have another cave of Chimyarites. So in other words, these are Jews who came from far away to spend their last years and be buried in the Holy Land. The fact that it's in the modern state of Jordan now is irrelevant. It was in the Holy Land for them. So again, it's a sort of a hop, skip, and a jump through a whole field of epigraphy, which we're trying to make sense of from this vastly rich material in Israel, which show a kind of a life in extreme conditions, but it's a cultural and a literary life, which is really no less vital than cultural literary life anywhere else in the ancient world. Thank you. Any questions?
Just one little question.
Yeah.
The books that you just showed before, are you intending to putting them also on the internet, or? And then the second question within the books, because I didn't see them, do you also put these writings in context, or you just write them down like that?
Yes. The reason, yes. First, the answer is hopefully probably the first one, and yes to the second. Let me start with the second one. It's much more positive. Yes, for each inscription, whether it's one word or 50 lines, not many, 25 lines, let's say, each inscription, that's why it's taking us so long, has an image of the text when it's available. It's not always available. Sometimes inscriptions, say, are reported, photographed, and then disappear or are destroyed. But when it's available, we actually go. We actually do what's called an autopsy. We actually go to see with our own eye and record it, photograph, or make a drawing of it. So each inscription has a drawing or image or photograph, the text in the original language, an English translation, all the bibliography and historical and scholarly apparatus, gobbledygook, and then a commentary in English, which explains both epigraphical issues and also historical issues in context and importance. So every inscription has that. Sometimes an inscription of one name could have a long commentary, depending on what it is. So yes, and that's why it's also taking up, we've published thousands of pages, we've up to inscription 4,000 already. So the first question, which is an extremely sensible question, is it on the internet? Not yet. Will it be? Yes. Now, what you've done is you've touched on an internal problem within the editorial board of the thing. And yes, we want it now on the internet. The publisher, a very staid academic publisher based in Berlin, says yes, that will come after we finish publishing the books. But publish, I mean, now, especially with epigraphy, when things change, we'll publish something, someone will correct us, things change, things are discovered all the time. The internet is the ideal setting for publication, and we very much want it to be published now on the internet, but since we're bound to them and they're doing it, all the volumes will come out, and then they say they'll put it on the internet. So, you know.
I have a follow-on question sort of about the internet. So during the time that this material was being done, there was spoken language which was transient and disappeared in seconds.
Right.
And then there were these formats that were meant to be time independent.
Right.
And now we live in a world where we have an internet which is incredibly transient, and yet it has a certain permanence that's not carved in stone, as it were, literally.
Right.
What are you seeing in terms of the parallel here, in terms of what's to be taken away from where we are now in terms of information storage and where they were back then, trying to store a permanence of concepts?
Right. That's a very good question. First of all, let me just say that in the ancient world, a person's spoken language and written language was not always the same. So many of these Greek inscriptions were written by Hebrew speakers who may have known a little bit of Greek, and the opposite as well. So when they wrote, writing, I think, was a different kind of emphatic act then. And your question, I think, points to one of the, fundamental problems, but also areas of interest in ancient writing, that who is the intended audience? Now, for the epitaphs, like these, intended audience is us, posterity. Until, of course, the end of days, in which case everything changes. And there is messianic longings you can see in these texts. Okay, so that now in the mosaic floors, where they say so and so gave such a sum of money for the fountain or for the floor, that is for the local community, but also posterity. You know, I so and so, just like someone who puts his name on a building at Hebrew University now. You know, it's for posterity to see his great benefaction and generosity. However, not all texts are like that. Some texts are private. Some texts were not meant to be in the sort of perpetual global database, but were actually either directed just to the family, like you have caves in which families buried their dead, and they wrote things more or less for themselves, to each other. There's also, so because the caves were dark, sealed by heavy stones, only family would go in, so they were basically writing to each other across generations. There's also caves in a place near called Maresha, where you have actually lovers writing messages coming to each other and writing messages to each other in the cave. So it really it's as varied as the human experience is. That's all I can say.
If I can, a very quick question and a request. When you come into Israel and you come into the airport, the first thing you see, you go down a long ramp, and in front of you there's a beautiful mosaic which must be at least 20 feet tall, and there are 3 or 4 pieces. If you look at it closely, it's written in Greek. Can you tell us something about those mosaics? And please have the airport put something up explaining what the hell they are.
I don't remember. What is it, Guy? Which one is it?
Church from if you look on the right-hand side, you can read about it. I can show you tonight.
It's a church mosaic. I don't remember seeing it. I don't remember what it was. Okay, a church mosaic. Yeah.
There are also birds on it, which correlate to your city.
Yeah. So it's a church mosaic from where? Chuvat Brachot. Okay, right. That would be like 5th, 6th century, something like that. Where most of the mosaics at that level were back from the 5th, 6th century Byzantine period. Yeah. No. Second temple. So 70.